Visual scene displays. Wowza. I am very excited about this conversation I had today with Dr. David McNaughton and Dana Patenaude. Dana is a BCBA and a third-year PhD student, and Dr. David McNaughton, if you're a speech language pathologist, you have heard this name over and over again. He is just so smart and doing such amazing research in the area of AAC. His name has come across my desk so many times and looking up information to share with you in our CEUs that we do at the ABA Speech Connection. So having him on the show was really just such an honor. We're talking about an article today that they both worked on called Using Visual Scene Displays with Young Children in Evidence-Based Practice Synthesis. And they talk about using visual scene displays. In the show, we call it VSDs. And it's a really amazing technology that we probably might even have access to on our current students' devices. And the idea of having a picture, shared storybook reading, having a picture from a student's maybe current vacation, what they did over the weekend, creating these hotspots so that the student can communicate about current events, things that are important in their environment. I think this just has so many implications for us as treating clinicians, whether you're working with younger students or older students. I think this is going to be a very exciting episode. And in the show notes, I will have information about this article and videos of showing this technology in action. As you can tell, I'm super pumped about this one. Let's get right on into it.
You're listening to Autism Outreach Podcast, a podcast full of ready-to-use strategies to help those with autism strengthen their communication skills. Here's your host, Rose Griffin of ABA Speech, a speech therapist and board-certified behavior analyst who shares tips you can use in your next therapy session.
Welcome to the show today. We have two wonderful guests that I am very excited to spend some time talking with. Welcome to the show, Dr. David McNaughton. Thank you so much for coming on to the show. And Dana Patenaude. Thank you for being here, Dana. Dana is a BCBA and a third-year PhD student. I believe that's correct. I read your bio, and it had lots of things about early intervention and all these wonderful things in AAC. I'm actually putting together a course on naturalistic developmental behavioral interventions as we speak. So NDBI, as we call it in the field. So when I read your bio, I was like, ooh, I have to tell Dana about that.
Yes.
Yeah, so I'm excited. I don't think people are talking about NDBI enough in either field. Actually, Asha has written some articles on it, believe it or not. You got to really kind of be reading the articles to know about that. But and then Dr. David McNaughton, thank you so much for coming on. I mean, if you look up your name on ResearchGate, it's very impressive. And thank you so much for all of your research in the field. I definitely try to bring research to practitioners because, as you know, when you're a practitioner in the trenches 5 days a week, it feels hard to even know, like, wait, ASHA wire, how does that work? How do I get my latest Java article, right? Behavior Analysis and Practice is like a very nice publication too. So today we're going to be talking about an article that you were both on called Using Visual Scene Displays with Young Children in Evidence-Based Practice Synthesis. And when I reached out to Dr. McNaughton, he said, hey, this is an article that we did and it's open access, which I love. So I will share the link in the show notes. That is always nice when there's one less barrier to getting access to the research. So can you describe for listeners who may be unfamiliar with what a visual scene display is? I know myself as a treating therapist, I have questions about this because I am a treating clinician 2 days a week. And I have heard this come up and I've definitely, read some articles about it. But sometimes I feel like it's kind of hard to wrap your brain around. So can we kind of start with like just the groundworks of like, what does that really mean?
Sure, yeah. So a visual scene display, it may sound a little complicated, like you said, Rose, but it's really quite simple. It's basically a photo that's presented on some type of tablet,
usually an iPad, but it can be Android,
iPad, whatever. And it is programmable with speech. And there's a bunch of different apps that you can use to do that. So you would choose a photograph that's meaningful and interesting to the child or the person that you're using the VSD with. And usually they have a person doing something of interest to the learner. And so then you program something that we call hotspots. where you take a picture and then with your finger, you just circle something of interest in the photograph and you record yourself either saying what the word is or a sound effect of some sort that's related. And it's a really neat, innovative way to build language for kids in a different way.
Okay. So when I was reading this as somebody who, has used AAC, like, I specialize in autism, so it's definitely AAC. But now as somebody who is doing more training and, things like that, I have actually not used in real life a visual scene display. So one of my logistical questions is, we know about a lot of the AAC apps that a lot of speech language pathologists know about, whether it's Dynavox, something from Prenke Romic, LAMP, or, Prolo Codago. Is the visual scene display do those companies have visual scene displays? VSD is what we're calling it. Or is this a totally different app? I think that's something that that was my first barrier. When I was reading the article, I was like, oh, this sounds great. Yes, I want to tell people about this. Like, I think it'd be cool to show videos of this in action. But I think that's what, from a logistical area, I'm like, well, how do I get access to this? Is my first question.
Sure. Yes. So there's currently at least 3 apps that are available, and they are through some of the leading manufacturers. So Tobii Dynavox has an app which can be used to support visual scene displays. The Attainment Company has an app that can be used to support visual scene displays. And there's some other companies internationally. Therapy Box in the UK also supports them. I can provide you with a link for the show notes that'll take you to some of the manufacturers that are currently supporting the use of visual scene displays.
Okay.
But sorry, I was just going to say, I think you raise a good point. People are very used to the traditional apps that are out there to support communication. And really what we would suggest is this is just one more app you add to your portfolio. It's not sort of a either or situation. Right. It's a lot like the apps on your phone, right? You've got multiple apps for very specific purposes. Yeah. And that's what we see with visual scene displays, that there's a number of things it does very well, but we're not saying this is all you would ever use for everything.
Okay. I like that. And yeah. And when you bring it back to my phone, it's always right here, David. The phone is always right here. I have lots of apps with an online business. There's lots of social media apps I'm looking at way too often. But okay, that makes a lot of sense. So it's not an either or, but it does sound, when I was reading the article, I was like, oh, this sounds so cool. So how can these visual scene displays be used in therapy? You outline it really nicely in the article, but can you summarize it a bit for us?
Yeah, sure. So really, visual scene displays are powerful both in expressive and receptive vocab and language building. So for expressive, we have the hotspots, as I've described. So kind of as an example, if you have a picture of a playground, because a child loves a playground, and you make a hotspot of the slide and you circle the slide and you can record yourself saying "wee" as they go down. This is something that would expressively build that, okay, when a child is maybe going to the playground, sees an image of a playground, something like that, they might have that new phrase or, the "we," that this is fun, and building that in expressively. And then receptively, it provides a way for a child outside of their current context, outside of the here and now, that they can talk about a certain topic and kind of understand that topic, even when it's not right there in front of them. There's a lot of really wonderful ways that visual scene displays can be built into a number of therapeutic activities. Ones that we see a lot of currently are various peer interactions. So things like storybook reading and play. And those are the big ones, but they're using them to build in language into these interactions so that peer interactions are kind of emphasized within the therapeutic setting.
Okay, so let's say I have this app, the VSD, and I want to include a picture of going to grandma's house or some favorite place or a vacation photo. I'm just thinking we're in back to school mode now. Then I, as the clinician, can, in theory, upload the photo, and then I'm the one that's going to be creating the hotspots on the picture. And then am I using my own voice, or is there a voice that is generated from within the application?
So typically you would be using your own voice. We have
Okay.
seen some people experimenting with using children's voices. So it's digitized speech that we're using here. But exactly, you would either take a picture in the moment as Dana's described, or you can import a photo from your photo library. And then it's simply an issue of saying, within the app, I'm going to add a hotspot. You circle the part of the image that you want to be used as a hotspot, record the speech, and it's ready to go. It's ready to be used. And we've actually had a number of studies where the children themselves are involved in saying, this is where I want a hotspot, right? They can't always produce the speech that would be used in that situation. But when you look at some of the, when you talk about NDBI and following the child's interests and building their interests into the activity, this is really ideal for that because you can instantly give them the vocabulary for those parts of an image or an activity that's of greatest interest to the child.
Oh, I love that. And yeah, and I was reading your bio, David. I worked with middle school, high school students for 10 years, and I know that some of your research is around vocation. And I'm like, oh, this sounds so great across the lifespan because, when students get older, it's so hard to make things that are, I just say age respectful, right? And I think this lends itself really nicely to that too. Or with it being back to school time, you're like, oh, my family went to Utah, we went to Zion, and we're like, oh, this could be something so nice where if a student is using a device, it might be a really nice way to share about it. Because back in the day, I'd be like, take some pictures and then we'll come in and we'll look at it. But that's really all clinician directed, right? This could be something that's more having the child be the initiator, which I always think is so much more difficult for us as clinicians to think about. So I like this. I think I'm excited about this. Okay, so this study, what was the purpose? What was the actual purpose of the study? Do one of you want to share?
Yeah, so as David has mentioned, there are lots of apps out there right now to support language and communication for children who use or could benefit from AAC. But as practitioners, we face a lot of challenges knowing what to use with what child, what app is going to work, for what kid, what features does it have, et cetera. And so there's really a challenge there for practitioners to figure out what to do, what's going to work. And so, so as an example, in my practice, I, as a BCBA, worked with a couple kids who utilized AAC. Or needed AAC, and we were really advocating for it, and it was kind of a back and forth thing. But for me and one child that I'm thinking of in particular, we kind of worked with a lot of different apps, and before that, a lot of different low-tech options. And finally, we were able to work with her speech therapist, and we found something that worked, and she's absolutely flourishing, and she just started kindergarten. And her school is really excited about her communication and her use of her AAC device, which is really cool. But that's just one child, right? And I'm just one BCBA and a practitioner. And so basically, we wanted to see what evidence is there to support this technology, because it can be such a challenge to figure this all out. So we wanted to look at the evidence base for VSDs to make this a little bit less challenging for practitioners who, like you said, hear about this technology and think, oh, could this be, useful to my clients? And we want to show that it is we did find that it is evidence-based. We wanted to know what's going on with this. So we, the purpose research-wise was kind of twofold. We wanted to see what research is out there for early childhood populations. And then also we wanted to look basically at the quality and the quantity of that evidence.
Okay, wonderful. And what I thought was so fascinating in the study, you discussed the Council for Exceptional Children Standards for Evidence-Based Practices. I feel like, I have an online business. I've had it for 7 years, and I feel like there's just a lot of pseudoscience that flies on all of the social media platforms that I try to combat by having like really smart people like you on my show to share no, there's evidence and there's really rigorous things that we're looking for within this research. So can you just kind of outline those for me? I thought they were really interesting to hear about.
Yeah, sure. They are definitely set up to, like you said, make sure that the work that's being done is rigorous. There's several standards out there as well. We just chose to use CEC standards. So basically, there's a set of quality indicators, and it's ensuring that we can be confident in a body of research to say, okay, these studies were done well and they're meaningful. And based on these sets of criteria, these quality indicators, we can be pretty sure that at least we have confidence that this was done well. And so there are 8 different categories of quality indicators. And then within those 8, there's kind of a bunch of, smaller sub ones. So there's 22 little ones that I am not going to bore you and your listeners with each specific detail, but the broad general categories include setting and participant information, information on implementation fidelity and internal validity, external validity, the outcomes, and social validity. So there's, and as I said, there's a bunch of smaller things within each of those categories that when you're reading an article, you can look at and say, okay, they did provide enough information on the participant, for example, that this could be replicated, or they presented social validity information so that we know that the participants had a say in this research and the outcomes, and it was meaningful for them. So that's kind of a quick summary of what you might find in some of those.
Yeah, I love that because, I don't know if I blocked out my research class from my master's degree in speech therapy. I'm sure we talked about journal articles and things like that, but I do remember because I was traumatized by the course I had to take becoming a BCBA about all the various types of research designs. And I just feel like sometimes as consumers, as clinicians and consumers, we think like, oh, well, somebody wrote something and then it must be a rigorous research article. And that couldn't be farther from the truth. So I've been pulling out that the triangle with the external validity, internal validity, all the different sides and talking about, what makes research robust and how can we be more critical consumers? Because if you go to social media to get your information about how to plan intervention, you're going to get wildly different ideas. And a lot of them are not robust and research-based. So thank you for being scientific. Can you share what information was gathered from this particular study?
Yes. So I'll just go right down to the results that essentially we found that VSDs are an evidence-based practice for children in early childhood with autism and IDD. So they are evidence-based based on those standards. And, we found that there are a number of studies that are looking at VSD technologies, which is awesome. And the types of kids that we're looking at in these studies also varied. Some kids had no speech, some kids had some speech, some utilized different forms of communication. And VSDs were used across a range of activities. We saw storybook reading, we saw different creative play activities, videos with TV shows that they liked. So basically that this is what makes VSD so cool and unique is that they are individualized and they're based on a child's interests and you can make them quickly, as David had mentioned earlier. So the other thing that I really love about VSDs is that they have the capability of being culturally responsive based on what's important to a family. It can be programmed in their language or emphasize events that are meaningful to them with sounds and words that are of meaning to them. And so I really love them for that reason, because I think they're extremely applicable and culturally responsive. So we found that they were utilized across a lot of different activities and age groups. Interestingly, too, most of the children in this study, the participants, were under 5. And I'm sure that and I know from, as you mentioned, my early intervention background. And when you said NDBI, that's a lot of what I've done too. It can be really hard to find really motivating things for a child under 5. Sometimes it can be really easy or it can be really impossible. And so that was a cool part of seeing this too, that not only was it evidence-based and utilized across, various kids, but it was motivating for little ones too, that, we have the the videos and sound and motion.
Mhm.
The other thing is that we didn't touch on quite yet is that VSDs can also be made as video VSDs.
Mm. Okay.
I realized we didn't touch on that. So
Yeah.
video VSDs are very similar, but you're embedding hotspots into a meaningful video. So this can be used and has been used, and I'll let David talk about this too, with vocational settings and skill building that way.
Interesting.
Yeah, I will just jump in for a moment and talk a little bit about video VSD. So when we introduce the topic, we try and sort of do it staggered in stages because, as you've noted, it's a lot to sort of move into this whole world all at once. So in a video VSD approach, we take a video that's of interest to the child. So we'll stick with the playground, and maybe it's a video of the child going down the slide. And then at that point in the video in which we say, oh, there's something there we'd like to talk about, we create a still image. And then we program that still image in exactly the way that we've described. So then when the child goes to play back this video with someone, the video plays and then pauses, and there's an opportunity for the child to touch the hotspot. And it's just really interesting to think about the different stages of language development that we can use a VSD and a video VSD approach with. Because for the activity I've just described, a video plays and then pauses, and there's an opportunity to touch a hotspot. And then once you've done it, the video keeps playing and you come up to your next hotspot. That's a really wonderful way to teach turn taking, right? Because you've got this natural cue that, oh, it's the child's turn to do something because the video stopped. And they're not only taking a turn, they're taking a turn by making use of vocabulary within that turn. So sometimes, just as with very, very young children, we may have individuals that use communication in a way that they may not fully be understanding, for example, right? So if we're doing that activity with a very young child and they produce the word slide, or they produce the word swings, or they produce the word sandbox or something, right? I'm not making the argument that all of those children always are taking those turns with the intent of telling you slide. But if they get these practice opportunities to access vocabulary in that way and use it in that way and be responded to in a meaningful way, that's how children learn language. So as Dana was mentioning, we've seen VSDs and video VSDs used with children who had not making use of speech and at the very beginning stages of taking turns within communication. And that's one way that we can introduce taking turns within communication, accessing vocabulary within a communication activity with those children.
Yeah, I love this. It just makes so much sense. I guess a question I have too that's come up as we're talking, we did a really cool CEU last year, and I have this membership called the ABA Speech Connection. It's for ASHA and ACE provider, which is a lot of fun. And we did Barb Weber, who presents a lot. She did something on AAC assessment. But I love the idea of this for really across the lifespan, but as a way to like a low response effort way to get started with communication. It just makes so much sense. So what do you think about how could somebody tie this into their AAC assessment? Do you think like trying to get one of these apps, how we do an assessment and we try to see what's going to work for a student? I like the idea of the VSD. I think it's really neat to use for intervention, but have you had any thoughts on how people are tying this into maybe their evaluation piece? Because I'm just thinking logistically as a funding source. If I say to a family or the insurance, like we need this app, right, for the communication, but this would also be really great, which make the VSD, but it would be two prices, right, to get the two different applications.
So very often these, like the ability to make visual scene displays and video visual scene displays is bundled with other things that are already going on in a device.
Okay.
And sometimes it is just like one feature of a multi-feature app umbrella, for want of a better
Oh,
word.
okay.
So there are, I'm trying to think through the different apps that provide this capability, but it's typically something that exists as part of a suite rather
Okay.
than sort of saying I'm going and purchasing this on its own for
Okay.
X amount. And typically, if that is ever necessary, I mean, these are not very expensive apps as apps go.
Okay. Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay. Because I'm just thinking of the logistics of it from somebody who's actually listening and is like, oh, I want to try this, or I think this makes so much sense for so and so. But it does seem like a really nice. I'm knee deep in this NDBI book and putting this course together, like the balanced turns and all the things and child led that you're talking about. So I love that. So for practitioners that are listening that are as excited as I am about this, how could we get started using visual scene displays and intervention? Like, what do you think would be the easiest way to kind of get started with this?
So we've got some website links that I can share with you that number one would provide access to some of the articles that were included in Dana's study. And we've actually taken some of those articles and developed them into web pages, for want of a better word. So you can actually see videos of the children who participated in these studies and just the changes across time as they made use of visual scene displays and video visual scene displays. I think so. That's a resource that we can share the link, and that'll provide links to other places as well. Dana, did you have additional ideas?
I was thinking, additionally, kind of on the practitioner end of things.
Where can we get started? So once you have identified an app, then one of the earliest places that I've seen people get started is storybook reading. It's a really awesome way to embed VSDs within practice and in therapy. So for a storybook, you would take a picture of a storybook page and you would program hotspots with, maybe on the picture or it's something, a bear is in, I don't know. And you would make a hotspot with the bear. And now you can have this interactive book with peers, whether that's peers in an inclusive setting. And now you have this reciprocity of we're looking at this book together. And now the child who may have limited speech or utilizes AAC has a way to build in language to communicate with one another, with their peers, with their teachers, parents, whomever, and you would basically make a VSD photograph of each page. And you kind of just flip through just like a book. And some of the studies that were in this paper that were reviewed, they made use of storybooks for VSDs, and social validity information was reported. And in one study that I can recall off the top of my head, the children, all but one, reported at the end that they all preferred the VSD version of looking at a book with friends than the physical copy book. And anecdotally, the researchers mentioned that one child said that they preferred the book, but every day they would run in and run right over to their iPad. So we can't really be too sure there, but there's a lot of evidence that not only is this evidence-based, but kids really enjoy it. So I think a good way to start is a storybook interaction.
And if there's one more feature that I can sneak in here, and as I say, we sort of tried to stagger this across time because there's a lot coming at once. But one of the things that we can do with the hotspots is not only program in like digitized speech or us making a sound effect, but many of these apps also have something called a transition to literacy feature, which means that when we touch the hotspot, the text for that word appears and then recedes. So let's pretend that we'll keep plugging away on the slide. If I touch the hotspot for slide, they'd hear that word and the word slide would appear and then recede. And so a couple of things are interesting about this. Number one, these kids are learning sight words as they're just talking about the things that are of greatest interest to to them.
Hmm.
It also then helps it become an activity where it makes good sense for children with disabilities in an inclusive classroom to be doing this with typically developing peers. Both of them are gaining something from this,
Oh, yeah.
right? So we've now got this really interesting activity where both individuals are developing skills that are going to be important to them. And I won't suggest that, there's a whole lot more to literacy than a sight word vocabulary, but acquiring a sight word vocabulary and being known by others as having acquired a sight word vocabulary really can do a lot to change the perceptions of a child, of an individual. So again, that's sort of been a really interesting side effect for us, is not only is this something that children are interested in and want to do, but it's helping them get some very interesting skills that'll be useful in a wide variety of ways.
Amazing. Oh my gosh. I need to try this immediately. Well, I'm excited I will get the links that for this particular article, and then for the resources that you would like to share. I love that this is open access so we can talk about it, and definitely try to shine a light on how exciting this is. I mean, I think as a clinician, it sounds like something that would be amazing to utilize in therapy. So thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It was great to connect with both of you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having us.
Thanks for listening to Autism Outreach. If you enjoyed the show today, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss an episode full of actionable strategies you can use in your therapy room. Write a review too. That would mean so much to me. I always love hearing from you. Have a specific topic that you want included on a future show? Reach out over on Instagram, ABA Speech by Rose, or visit me at www.abaspeech.org.